Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and get straight to the core insights from key sources, saving you time and making sure you're genuinely informed. Today, we're tackling something huge, a really crucial mission, actually. We're diving into the true balance sheet, the often invisible one, for immigration and societal diversity. We want to get past the usual shouting matches, the simple slogans. The sources we've looked at, they lay out a pretty stark picture. People moving, cultures mixing. It's just a fact of the modern world. And yeah, it brings amazing innovation, richness, all that good stuff. But it also exposes, sometimes even creates, these deep cracks in society. So our goal today is to move beyond that really tired debate. Is it a blessing? Is it a burden?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because clinging to that simple binary, the sources argue, is probably the biggest mistake we make when trying to understand this. The real goal for you, listening, is to grasp that managing diversity well isn't just some temporary political fix. It's a permanent need. And the sources make this argument, sometimes it's a bit uncomfortable, that both unmanaged diversity and a deliberate lack of diversity, they both carry these really significant, often hidden costs. Ignore either side of that coin, and you basically guarantee friction, division, and ultimately societal decline.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Where should we start? Probably where the friction feels highest, those hidden costs of diversity when it's not managed well.
Right. These are the things people argue about, often emotionally, but maybe don't always analyze structurally. So first up, economic and infrastructural pressures. Now, the sources all pretty much agree. The big picture economic benefits, filling labor shortages, boosting GDP, driving innovation, that's real, very real.
Okay, but there's always a but, isn't there?
There is. The but is that these benefits, they aren't spread evenly, not at all.
Okay, and that's the key friction point, right?
Yeah.
How do the sources describe that gap? Who wins, who doesn't?
They frame it as a sort of localized burden versus a generalized or maybe corporate benefit. Think about it. Big companies, maybe in tech or agriculture or wealthier regions, they get the immediate financial upside from immigrant labor. But who picks up the tab for the extra school places needed? The strain on local clinics or emergency rooms? The need for, say, new language programs.
It falls on the local communities,
Yeah.
often working class communities, right? The ones already feeling squeezed, maybe.
That's exactly it. They shoulder those immediate tangible costs. Housing, infrastructure, it adds up.
And if the companies or regions getting the benefit don't contribute to covering those local costs, well, you get a gap between the economic winners and the people feeling the pressure of change, maybe wage pressure in some jobs too.
Precisely. And that gap, that feeling of unfairness, it becomes politically explosive. It stops being just economics.
It turns into political ammunition.
Yeah. The sources are pretty clear. This resentment gets easily exploited, often cynically, by populist movements. So bad policy or a lack of policy directly fuels social division.
Okay, moving on from the pure economics, though it's obviously linked, what about cultural adjustment and social cohesion? Everyone agrees diversity brings new perspectives, food, music.
It absolutely enriches society. But, and this is a strong warning in the material, without real intentional strategies for integration, that richness can quickly sour, it can lead to fragmentation, mutual misunderstanding, just people living side by side, not together.
And that puts a huge strain on individuals, doesn't it? Both ways.
A tremendous burden. You've got immigrants potentially facing discrimination, language issues, maybe feeling isolated, their skills perhaps not even recognized. And on the other side, you can have genuine anxiety in the host community about the speed or scale of change. That's real too.
Plus, you often see that generational thing happening. The kids, especially if they go through the local schools, they adapt much faster than their parents. That can cause tension inside families, not just between groups.
Yeah, and the sources use a really potent phrase here. They talk about diversity being celebrated symbolically, food fairs, colorful posters, political speeches, but not structurally.
Structurally meaning?
Meaning real investment and policy in things like housing, hiring practices, education that actually fosters mixing and understanding. When you only do the symbolic stuff, the sources warn you don't get shared citizenship, you get parallel societies.
Just groups living separately within the same borders.
Basically, yes. There's no real mutual adaptation, where both the newcomers and the institutions kind of bend and adjust. Without that, you might have coexistence, maybe tolerance, but not shared belonging.
And that failure, that lack of structural integration, it sort of sets the stage perfectly for the next hidden cost. Political polarization and identity backlash.
It flows directly from it. When people feel like change is just happening to them, not with them, and when integration efforts seem weak or non-existent, populist leaders find fertile ground. They can very effectively tap into those fears, that division, and point the finger. Scapegoating immigrants for all sorts of wider problems becomes easy.
And the impact there goes way beyond just politics, according to the sources.
Mm.
It actually weakens the whole system.
It corrodes democratic institutions, that us versus them narrative. It erodes social trust, makes cooperation harder, makes governance itself less effective. It becomes harder to solve any big problem, whether it's related to immigration or not.
The sources called it an erosion of the moral fabric. That sounds pretty serious.
It is. It's framed as one of the most dangerous outcomes when diversity isn't managed with real intention and investment.
Okay, and there's one more cost category, one that's often truly invisible: the emotional and psychological toll.
Yes. This is about the human weight. We're talking displacement, maybe past trauma, the feeling of losing your identity, dealing with constant microaggressions or outright racism. It's heavy.
And there's that concept of code switching. Can you maybe unpack that a bit? What does that actually feel like day to day?
Sure. Code switching isn't just about language. It's the constant mental effort of adjusting your behavior, your accent, your mannerisms, even how you express opinions to fit into the dominant culture. You might do it multiple times a day.
Like changing how you act at work versus at home versus with friends from your own background.
Exactly. One example cited is just the exhaustion of constantly monitoring your tone, maybe your volume, even your clothes, just so you're seen as professional or non-threatening in certain settings. It means part of your brain is always busy translating your own behavior, never just being fully present.
That sounds exhausting, like an invisible tax you pay just to participate.
It is. And if a society ignores these psychological costs or doesn't create spaces where people feel they can be more authentic, you risk alienating huge pools of talent. Their potential just gets stifled because they can't bring their whole selves to the table.
Okay, so we've laid out some pretty significant costs if diversity isn't managed with real effort and resources.
Yeah.
But here's where, as you said, it gets really interesting. The sources flip the script. What happens if societies try to avoid change altogether? What are the costs of, well, of homogeneity?
Yeah, this is crucial. The sources are actually very critical of uniformity. The argument is that homogeneity, while it might feel comfortable or stable, especially for those already in power, it actually breeds deep rigidity. And in the long run, fragility.
It stunts a society's ability to adapt, basically.
That's the core idea. It prevents evolution. We see this first in intellectual and creative stagnation. Diverse societies are described as engines of creativity. That friction, the mixing of different worldviews, different ways of solving problems, different historical experiences, that's what sparks innovation in arts, science, tech, even how we govern ourselves.
Makes sense. Different angles on a problem.
Exactly. Whereas the homogeneous society, it's prone to groupthink. If everyone comes from a similar background, thinks alike, looks alike, well, the range of ideas narrows, imagination gets limited, and resistance to change, even necessary change, hardens.
And there's data on this.
Yes. Studies mentioned in the sources consistently show that diverse teams in business, for example, outperform less diverse ones, especially when tackling complex problems. They just avoid the blind spots that come with uniformity. Without that creative tension, progress just slows down.
It's like being stuck in an echo chamber. You can't see outside the box because, for you, there effectively is no outside.
Well put. And that connects directly to the second big cost of homogeneity: moral blindness and exclusion.
Explain that connection. How does a lack of diversity lead to moral blindness?
The sources argue there's often a direct link between a lack of diversity and a lack of empathy or perspective taking. If you rarely encounter people whose life experiences are fundamentally different from yours, stereotypes don't get challenged. They just harden. Discrimination stops feeling like a moral lapse. It gets normalized. It's just the way things are. It can even be seen as protecting the existing order.
The sources bring in history here, don't they? And it's pretty sobering.
It is. They point out that societies that actively suppress diversity, think segregation, forced assimilation policies, exclusionary laws, they often justified massive injustices by calling it social order or maintaining stability.
So the conclusion is quite stark then.
Very. The sources essentially say the absence of diversity isn't neutral ground. They actually call it complicity in inequality. Prejudice can thrive because there aren't enough different voices present to question the status quo from lived experience.
Wow. Okay. And this isn't just about abstract fairness or looking back at history. There are hard economic consequences today, right? Economic decline and demographic collapse.
This might be the most undeniable, quantifiable cost. Look at many advanced economies right now. They're facing aging populations, shrinking workforces, serious labor shortages. They simply cannot fill these gaps internally.
So they actually need immigration to keep things running.
They depend on it, not just for growth, but literally to sustain their current economies, their social welfare programs, their pension systems. It's become a demographic necessity for many.
So if a country rejects diversity out of, say, cultural anxiety, they're basically choosing economic stagnation.
Or worse, the labor force shrinks. The dependency ratio retirees versus active workers gets unsustainable. Innovation slows further. It's like imposing sanctions on yourself. Immigration brings those needed younger workers, yes, but also consumers, entrepreneurs, taxpayers. They revitalize communities. So choosing homogeneity for what feels like short-term comfort, the sources argue, leads directly to long-term decay. Systemic pressure builds up.
That's a huge trade-off. Comfort now for decay later. And the final cost listed is social fragility and this fear of change itself.
Right. It's a bit paradoxical. Homogeneity seems stable, but it actually creates fragility. Why? Because a society that isn't used to difference, isn't practiced in navigating complexity, becomes deeply fearful when change inevitably arrives.
They haven't built up the social muscles for it.
Exactly. They lack resilience. So when new groups do arrive, even if it's in small numbers, the reaction can be disproportionate. Panic, xenophobia, intense nationalism, a sort of siege mentality.
And the sources see that not as strength, but as a symptom of weakness.
Precisely. It's seen as a symptom of a society that has become brittle, calcified, unable to adapt to the realities of a connected, changing world.
Okay, so if unmanaged diversity leads to chaos and friction, but enforced homogeneity leads to stagnation and decay, both extremes are damaging.
That's the core conclusion, which means the whole debate needs to shift. It's not whether diversity is good or bad. It's how do we build what the sources call intentional inclusion.
Intentional inclusion. What does that actually look like on the ground? Based on the sources, what are concrete policies, the actions needed? Let's move past the rhetoric.
Okay. Intentional inclusion means recognizing that diversity needs structure. It needs to be actively supported by equity, by education, by smart policies. The sources pull out four sort of non-negotiable areas. First, real investment in integration programs. We're talking properly funded language training, yes, but also housing assistance that helps people live near jobs, not isolated, and concrete help with recognizing foreign professional credentials.
So making sure people can actually plug into the economy and the community effectively, not just arrive, but thrive.
Exactly. And the second action tackles that economic friction we talked about earlier.
Richard.
Actively combating discrimination and wage exploitation. If immigrants just become a pool of cheap, easily exploited labor, well, that fuels resentment from native-born workers. It creates an underclass, and you end up with those parallel societies again. Laws need to protect all workers fairly.
Right, a level playing field. And the third and fourth points seem to focus more on the kind of social fabric, civic unity, leadership.
Absolutely critical. Third is promoting shared civic values. The emphasis is on civic commitment to democracy, rule of law, mutual respect values that transcend ethnicity or religion, rather than demanding cultural uniformity. And fourth, deliberately encouraging dialogue, cultural exchange programs, and crucially, ensuring representation. Seeing diverse faces in leadership roles across business, politics, media, education, that matters hugely.
That makes a lot of sense. So the aim isn't forcing everyone to be the same, losing their heritage.
Not at all.
But creating a sense of shared belonging, where everyone, regardless of background, feels they have a stake in the country's future and see themselves reflected in its institutions.
That is the synthesis, precisely. The tension we've explored is this. You need structure, rules, investment, that intentionality to manage the inevitable disruption of change. But you also need that openness, that diversity, to avoid becoming rigid and stagnant. You need both.
So tying it all back, immigration and diversity. They aren't just inherently good or bad. They're more like a test, a really complex test of a society's maturity, its adaptability, its willingness to invest in its own future.
Well said. The sources really conclude that the ultimate measure of a nation's health, its strength, is its ability to do that transformation, to turn cultural difference into a source of collective power, to actively work to turn that friction into understanding, and to balance honoring heritage with embracing innovation. Ignoring the costs, as we saw, leads to festering problems. But rejecting diversity outright, that seems to guarantee decline. There's no easy path.
We've covered a lot the hidden costs on both sides, the potential benefits, and the kind of intentional policies needed to navigate this. The forces seem clear. The way forward isn't blind celebration, and it's definitely not fearful rejection. It's this idea of intentional inclusion, which clearly requires significant effort, resources, and political will. So here's something for you to think about. Of all those policies needed for intentional inclusion, the investment in housing and language, fighting discrimination, promoting shared values, ensuring representation, which one strikes you as the most critical and maybe the most challenging, to actually achieve that sense of shared belonging? Is it the money? Or is it the deeper cultural shift towards shared power? Something to mull over. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the very complex, very real equation of diversity in our modern world.